Our original plan was to have two very eminent speakers this afternoon. Hina Rabbani Khar, we are still waiting for her, and of course, Dr. Vali Nasr, who in many respects does not need any detailed introduction. He's very knowledgeable on Pakistan. So I'm just going to maybe start off the discussion, and if Hina Rabbani Khar joins us later, then that'll be good. Dr. Vali Nasr is presently on sabbatical, as he was telling me earlier on, for a year. But before that, he served as the Dean of International Affairs at the prestigious Johns Hopkins University, the Department of International Affairs. He's the author of many books, mainly on the Islamic world, on the Gulf, Middle East. He's also lived and visited Pakistan many times. He's lived here in the city of Lahore in the late 1980s for a year and a half when he was working on his book on the late Maulana Maududi. And he's also worked in a policy capacity as an advisor to the late US Ambassador Richard Holbrooke, the first US envoy for the Afghanistan-Pakistan region. And during that time, right after 9/11, Dr. Vali Nasr had the occasion to visit Pakistan on many occasions, and also to kind of get a view of policy making from the inner quarters of policy-making circles, both here in Pakistan as well as on the US side. So without further ado, if I can just begin with a couple of questions. As you've seen the title of this presentation, which I'm kind of slightly hesitant to stick to in its enormity, because I think it would be far more interesting to develop the theme on a larger canvas. The state of communication, Pakistan's role in a divided Muslim world. I think we should look at Pakistan and where it stands today in the larger Committee of Nations, and of course in relation to the Islamic world. Also, just to remind you, today is the day that we are, or at least the government wants us to recognize and celebrate the third anniversary of the end of Raddul Fasad, the 3-year campaign against terrorism in Pakistan, which formally ended on 21st February 2017. And of course, the message is that Pakistan has, in many respects, turned the corner. Security situation has improved, but the challenges remain, and the challenges are fairly formidable. This is one side of the story. The other side of the story is Pakistan's quest to assume a leadership position in the wider Islamic world. Recently, Prime Minister Imran Khan launched a so-called peace initiative between the Saudis and the Iranians, and this came up as a subject for criticism by many people who argued that it would be best for the ruling structure to focus internally first, and then move on to maybe a wider plane. So maybe we can start off with that, Dr. Nasr.
Before you start, I think they were signaling you.
They were signaling me?
No? Okay. All right.
Okay. So does Pakistan have what it takes to assume a bigger sort of leadership position, maybe in many respects parallel to Turkey or Malaysia or one of the bigger players on the global agenda, but also specifically to the Islamic world?
Well, there are different arenas here. I mean, one issue is how does Pakistan see itself? There are different important trends in the Muslim world. Malaysia, Turkey, Iran each represent a particular way of thinking about development, about economic growth, about the way state and society act together. So one issue is, what is the model for Pakistan? Does Pakistan look to Malaysia, or does Pakistan look to Turkey, or does it, and how does it see itself?
Sorry to interrupt the session, everyone. Please give a warm welcome to Ms. Hina Rabbani Khar, the 21st Foreign Minister of Pakistan and the youngest woman to serve at that very position.
And the first woman to serve in that position as Foreign Minister, and before that, Minister of State for Economic Affairs. And good to have you here. Lahore traffic.
Yeah, mobbed by the media. More like
Okay.
this.
That's right. Well, I mean, first of all, it's great to be on the panel with not only Farhan, but also with Hina, where I first met Hina when she was Foreign Minister and Minister of State for Foreign Affairs when I worked for Ambassador Holbrooke during about 10 years ago. So it's always good to be on the panel with you. You want to reiterate just so
Well,
the question, so Hina?
The question was, we're living in a time where our ruling structure has been putting out the message for quite some time that they want to raise Pakistan's profile, especially across the Islamic world. The recent initiative to patch up differences between the Saudis and the Iranians, for example. And this has coincided with lots of internal challenges, especially the economy. So I guess the obvious question in the minds of many people is this realistic? Is this going to work? Is this, does this carry the potential to be anything more than lip service to, after all, what could be a game changer for Pakistan if we succeed as a country?
So, just sort of to reiterate, there are two separate issues here. One is when you look at the Kuala Lumpur summit. So the idea was for large Muslim countries to envision a different kind of a relationship between state and society and a different future for the Muslim world than the one that has evolved under a Saudi leadership, would get together and basically define a new organizational structure. So the idea was that Pakistan would see itself as a member of those larger developing, economically developing countries, and that its government would see more parallels, let's say, with Mahathir's government in Malaysia and Erdogan's government in Turkey. Now, interestingly, Pakistan decided not to participate because of Saudi pressure, which suggests that it's not an independent actor in that sense, and that Saudis hold a veto on what Pakistan can do. So if you're Malaysia or you're Turkey or you're other Muslim countries, you would not think of Pakistan as an independent Muslim player, as a big Muslim country that is sort of playing on level with Turkey and Malaysia. Now, the issue of mediation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, there were very strong rumors that the Saudis asked Imran Khan, first in New York and then in Pakistan, to carry message to Iran. And the Saudis did it with sort of plausible deniability, always saying, no, we never did that. And that if there was any message, it was freelancing. There are two problems with this. One is that for serious mediation, Pakistan would actually have to have plan about what does the mediation entail, what does it look like, how does the negotiation process happen. Just sort of saying that two Muslim brotherly countries should get along does not really necessarily amount to a diplomatic initiative. And secondly, it's not clear what kind of a leverage Pakistan has either over Iran or over Saudi Arabia. And the Iranian view is that Pakistan essentially is much closer to Saudi Arabia for historical reasons as well as economic ties that bind the two countries. And therefore, to them, Pakistan is not quite a honest broker here. It's much closer to Saudi Arabia. It's seen to be supporting its, at least tacitly, its policies. And on the other hand, the Saudis don't really see any leverage from Pakistan on them. So they basically would like to treat Pakistan as messenger. And messenger is good, and that's a role that Pakistan can play, and it has played, but it doesn't amount to actually play the kind of role that is necessary to resolve the crisis.
Over to you, Hina Rabbani Khar.
Okay, so I would have a problem with that question at many different levels. Yeah, and I'll start with the first. So you said that the current dispensation in Pakistan wants to put Pakistan on the map within the Islamic sort of world. Okay?
Well, that's the statement.
That's the statement. Well, 1974, we all remember, the second OIC special summit in Pakistan. That was the time when Pakistan was on the map and perhaps could have carried the weight to play the type of mediation that it now wants to play, with everybody saying thanks but no thanks, right? I think it was embarrassing for Pakistan as a country when the Saudis turn around and say, well, he was never carrying our message. I think it's when the country wants to do more than than the weight that it carries, right? So I would say that in order to successfully be able to play that role, you have to first of all develop a reputation of a government which can at least handle dissent at home, right? So your reputation is more of divide and rule within home. You're not able to manage your home. Look, we love the Chinese, but we never learned from them. The Chinese took some decades off to be able to stabilize themselves internally, and then they started showing themselves off to the world. Currently only limited to the South China Sea, not even going beyond that, right? So when you ask them to become an international player on many other fronts, they would say, no thanks, but our role is limited to this much only. And that is obviously giving a lot of heartbreak to the whole world. So I generally believe that a country's foreign policy must be realistic in its outreach. If you feel that you can do more than is possible, it's not very effective. Okay, now the second part of it on this whole Kuala Lumpur summit, look, I believe it was one of the worst things that we have experienced as a nation, because not only did we prove that we are not independent enough to make our own decisions, we actually proved that we are not independent enough to attend a conference. Okay, so you go with, look, the OIC has been there since 1969. Okay, until now, I think there have been about 14 summits, head of state, head of government. Now, if you want to see how effective the notion of the Muslim world and its commonality of interests is, look at what's happening within the GCC, okay, with Qatar and Saudi Arabia almost at loggerheads, not almost, but literally not allowing airspace to be used and all of that type of stuff. So from there to now, with whatever happened in Kashmir, we were not even able to get a foreign ministers conference, let alone a summit on what happened in Kashmir. And what happened in Kashmir was a big thing, right? So if your place in the Islamic world, so to speak, is not your inability to even get a foreign ministers conference on something like this, and then you want to play the mediation role amongst two very important players whose enmity and animosity and adversarial role is known to the whole world, I think it's unrealistic. And unrealistic foreign policy is bad foreign policy.
But many people would disagree with you on the grounds that Pakistan is, after all, the Islamic world's only country armed with nuclear weapons, a very large military force, located in a tough region, no doubt, but nevertheless very important regions from Straits of Hormuz right up to the corner of Central Asia. Does that not make a difference?
It makes a difference in how you plan to leverage that position, right? So ever since I was born, I've been reading about how we are so geostrategically located, okay? In my assessment, in my very humble assessment, we have used that geostrategic location to our disadvantage rather than advantage, and I will explain this. We go and want to be a player in every war that happens within the region, on our outskirts or beyond, right? And never want to leverage this geostrategic position in terms of economic empowerment of the citizens of Pakistan. Now that to me would be a smart thing to do. Okay, so Malaysia to me would be a smart Islamic player. Pakistan to me would be a bit of an unsmart Islamic player, because you want to be part of every discord and every discontent and every war, but you don't want to be part of a commonality of future by economic integration and those types of things. Do you remember? We've gone through this many, many times, right? There's the D8 also, which was Indonesia, Pakistan, Malaysia. So all this, okay, the OIC is not working very well, let's create these reform-oriented extraterrestrial beings which will do it, but they never. Because, Farhan, I may want to go back a few sort of steps, and in the presence of somebody like Vali, it makes me not be able to, say that perhaps with the type of confidence I should be, but it starts with this whole cognitive revolution and this notion, myth of a commonality of purpose, which gives us the collective power to work for a common end, right? I am arguing over here that the Islamic world today does not have that commonality of purpose, okay, which binds us together into common action. I'm going to use my cheat notes and tell you what the OIC was created in 1969 for, okay? To safeguard and protect the interests of the Muslim world in the spirit of promoting international peace and harmony, to be the collective voice of the Muslim world. So my question to you is, do we have a collective voice of the Muslim world? Or do we not have Muslim world encouraging superpowers to go at the Muslim world? What has happened in Palestine right now, how many voices did you hear amongst the major players in the Muslim world saying that the whole notion of two-nation theory, which is backed by UNSC, is now being questioned by a superpower, and where are we on that? Did you hear a collective voice of the Muslim world? Did you hear a collective voice of the Muslim world on Kashmir? So all the issues which bound us together, okay, if we were not bound together because we were together, we were at least against a common threat. We are no more even against the common threat, is my purpose.
I just want to go over to you, Wali, on the question of Pakistan becoming a theocratic state. Is this better? Yes. Okay. Pakistan becoming a theocratic state, at least that's the argument from many people. Your book on Maulana Maududi and Jamaat Islami, which I read many, many years ago, carried out some groundbreaking good research on this. How bad is the situation in Pakistan that has evolved, let's say, in the last 40 years? And do you think Pakistan will be able to, in the foreseeable future, will be able to reverse this trend and gain a wider acceptability around the world? Because after all, this is, in many respects, a baggage of history.
So just before answering that, let me follow up on what Hina said. And I think it's important what she said, because a country should not base its strategy and its vision on false assumptions. And I think there's a false assumption, particularly prevalent in Pakistan, about a unity of the Ummah and the Islamic world. And that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist at many, many levels. If you looked, right now there is a robust conflict between Iran and its Persian Gulf neighbors to the south. There is a very serious civil war in the Sunni world at a governmental level between Qatar, Turkey, and the Persian Gulf countries, and then more fundamentally between Turkey's claim to be reviving some notion of Ottoman suzerainty over the Muslim world versus a Saudi Wahhabi sort of a view of domination over the Muslim world. In fact, one of the Saudis' great objections to Kuala Lumpur was that the Kuala Lumpur summit was designed to dethrone Saudis as the leaders of the Islamic world. So for and then look at a more fundamental level. Rohingyas get massacred, no Muslim country is interested. Saudis actually increased their investment in Myanmar. You have the Uyghur situation. Nobody, including Pakistan, criticizes China. The only country that actually says anything about this is Turkey. Kashmir happens. UAE actually, in the middle of the Kashmir crisis, gives Modi their highest national award. And as a result, you sort of wonder exactly what the Ummah is about, right? It seems like Ummah is only interested in Palestine anti-Americanism. And if anybody other than Americans kills Muslims, it's perfectly all right. Right? It's only killing Muslims only an issue if Americans do it. So, other countries have sort of come to grips with the fact that this is much more of a realpolitik world, and I think sort of that's important for Pakistan, not just at the government level, but at a sort of a public level for Pakistanis come to this realization. On the 2 points you raised, every country in this region thinks they're geostrategically important. Iran thinks it's geostrategically important. Saudis think they're geostrategically important. And the Turks think they're geostrategically important. So, you cannot be geostrategically important in your own mind. Others have to actually see you as geostrategically important. And that actually is not the case. Not to say Pakistan is not an important country. It's a very important country for many reasons. But if it's going to wave the geostrategic card, it has to compete with its rivals on that. So even if you're sitting in Europe or America, you're going to say, okay, there are 5 countries waving geostrategic card on me. Where am I going to put my bets? Is it going to be Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, or Pakistan? And then the nuclear issue is very important. You see, the nuclear issue, as far as the Muslim world is concerned, Pakistan's nuclear program, nuclear weapons arsenal is not in the service of the Muslim world. It's not defending Muslim causes, it's defending its own tensions with a country where almost all of rest of the Muslim world has embraced wholeheartedly. Iran has very warm relations with India, which has only been disrupted by US sanctions. UAE and Saudi Arabia look at India as the most important trading partner after China. Turkey has good relations. So the rest of the Muslim world is not really exactly on the same page as Pakistan about the importance of Indo-Pakistan conflict. So the nuclear weapons is irrelevant. The nuclear weapons matter to America and Europe, but it doesn't really matter to Turkey, to Iran, to Saudi Arabia in that sense. It's not in their service. So it doesn't make Pakistan an important Muslim country. It may make it very important geostrategically. Now, I mean, ultimately Pakistanis have to say, how much theocracy do they feel on a daily basis in their lives? I mean, at least I would say maybe as a episodic visitor to Pakistan, I would think that maybe the sort of the theocratic argument has been loosened a bit. I'm actually hopeful at least one of the silver linings of the changes in Saudi Arabia is that it might provide a shock, if you would, to the sort of this discourse in Pakistan. If the Saudi Arabia, which was so much supportive of this discourse in Pakistan, is now abandoning its own attachment to Wahhabism and may stop supporting Islamist causes, that this might have a positive effect in Pakistan. But the more important issue, and I think the time for that debate is now in Pakistan, and similar debates have started in other Muslim countries, that theocracy and Islamic State at a fundamental level has failed. It has failed to bring development to Pakistan. It has failed to generate economic growth. It has failed to deliver. I mean, if Maududi, on whom I worked, had put Islamic State as an alternative to secular Western state, that it would provide everything that Pakistan was not getting from secularism and a secular state, it clearly has not happened. I mean, and Islam has been ascendant since the time of Zia until recent period. The Turks at one point in time, the Turkish Islamist Party took a look at the sort of a Pakistan model of Islamic State or Muslim Brotherhood Islamic State, and then finally decided this is not going to work. That's when Erdogan and his compatriots changed the rules of the game, created a new political party that was willing to participate in democracy, was embracing capitalism. Similarly, in Malaysia, sort of abandoned many precepts of Islamism and accepted a kind of Islamic capitalism as its mantra. But that debate is not happening in Pakistan yet, and that's what's missing here.
As a politician, do you think that debate, very vital debate, can take place? Do you think we've arrived at that point as a country where we can begin to have a more open debate along those lines?
Well, I mean, anything to go by right now, I think openness is not the defining feature of this regime, right? And dissent or... I look at dissent more as diversity, and I think Pakistan needs to really be able to accept and fully hug the diversity. We are a federating, a federal state, and we have diversity in our geography, in our culture, in our language, in our people, in what they associate to being their identity. Now, the problem is that since the last 7 decades, we have tried to enforce an identity upon this diverse group which coalesced together in the form of the Pakistani state, but we've tried to enforce this ideological sort of, mantle over them and told them that, you can only be patriotic if you fully accept this to be the duty. So to me, the duty of Pakistan is not to defend an ideology as a state, but to deliver to the people of Pakistan, right? Both in how it conducts its foreign policy, how it conducts its economic policy, how it conducts its social policy. And to me, we need to recognize that we have failed to do that, to be able to do the type of thinking that Wali is encouraging us to do, right? Because any theocratic tendencies have not served this country well, and they have not served this country ever, right? So why are we, and we look at India and see them self-destructing and love to talk about that. But when we look at our past, we are not able to really decipher as to what we did to ourselves and therefore learn lessons from it and not at least repeat the same mistakes. So I think there is a lot of hope, I have to say, which is coming in from the schools, universities and colleges of Pakistan, right? So you see, you almost see like the Greta Thunberg in climate change to be happening in Pakistan, political sort of dialogue, right? But if you're expecting a lot of this debate to be happening in the parliaments of Pakistan, no. I think this government is very clear in using whatever is at its disposal to ensure that there is no diversity, forget dissent, reflected through the mainstream, either media or the mainstream political institutions, or the mainstream is completely devoid of it, right? But you see at what can be called grassroots level. So I think, and that's not new to Pakistan. I think this happened during the Zia time. And it's sad that what happened during the Zia time is happening again, because it shows that this time is very similar to the Zia time. And we all know by now that the Zia time is no time to go back to. So we are, interestingly again in a conundrum that, and ever since we've been born, I think we've been talking about Pakistan being at crossroads. We never seem to, every country is always at crossroads, right?
Crossroads.
Yes, because there are choices that you make as individuals, as states, all the time.
Just very briefly, before we move on to the next question and then hopefully open the floor for questions. Zia's time was a very different time from the times that we live in now. In the sense that for most Pakistanis in the late 70s, the 80s, the main source of independent information was the BBC's Urdu service. Today, it's the social media, and the government recently tried to put some curbs on that, but those completely, that whole initiative completely backfired, so they've had to step back from that. Is this the kind of change that hopefully might open up new and more progressive avenues for Pakistan, or do you think it's too early to make that call?
Look, Farhan, I think that goes without saying. That's obvious, okay? Technology has not only changed the dynamics in Pakistan, it has changed the dynamics all over the world, right? What is happening to the international world order to a large extent is because of the fact that this new technology has made everybody the access to information now, and people are making this, this decision for themselves. Does this system work for us, whether it's at the local level or at the national level or at the international level, or does it not? And most people seem to be right now, including President Trump sitting in the White House, reacting by saying, no, this system doesn't work for us, right? And they are reacting to the system. So we are breaking down the current order, but what is going to come out of it, frankly speaking, nobody knows. So that happens, that's happening at the international level. That's also happening to some extent because, Pakistan is very interesting. When it comes to the law and to the constitution, everything is right. We don't need to change the constitution to give our people the rights, right? But when it comes to the implementation of those laws or the overhanging constitution, everything seems to be wrong. Because it's almost like the structures that we have built come in the way of the constitution, okay? Rather than assist the constitutional rights, they come in the way, okay? And therefore, in this government also, you see this big reaction to everything that is happening, which might be considered to be positive for Pakistan. They want to curb it, right? And that's why I only compare it to the Zia regime, not because of perhaps anything else. And that is, look, a country, it goes back to the first question. Vali and I were both, just a week back, a few days back, we were at Munich together, right? And one of the most interesting takeaways for me was the Chinese foreign minister saying in reaction to the American Secretary of State, Pompeo, that please do not lose your confidence in fearing China. Because in the fear of China, the US seems to be losing. Now, that is what I say for Pakistan also. Let's not lose our confidence. We are bigger than what we want. You know what, the role that we have for ourselves is actually not such a great role. What we can do for ourselves is perhaps going to give Pakistan a much bigger, better role, because you have to, look, a country which is going around asking for chanda, okay, then wants to go around and say, we will be the reconciliation bosses for the world, and we will make sure that Iran and Saudi Arabia, and we are part of the dissent, we've taken sides already, and yet we are going to be, so let's be realistic. Matlab, what you can say has to be held by what you can do.
And just for the record, from the financial year that began last year, 1st July, and for the next 3 years, Saudi Arabia will give deferred oil payments which would be deferred indefinitely, worth almost $10 billion. And as we all have heard, there's no free lunch. So there's a lot of money on the table. Finally, Wali, relations with India. It's been a bad past year, Kashmir, as you know, and Kashmir seems to be practically still on at least a lockdown or at least a half lockdown. Where do you think India and Pakistan are going to go in future with this? And also, if you could look at this entire situation in relation to India's internal dynamics.
Well, I think generally India has a very clear sense of where it's going. It has a vision of not only internal transformation under Nehru and under Modi, which wants to sort of replace Nehru's legacy, and then maybe for the next 4 or 5 years that would be the main preoccupation of the Prime Minister of India, is actually domestic. But he has a very clear sense of the way it's raising its economic profile. It wants to compete with China. India just last week surpassed France and Britain to become one of the top 5 largest economies in the world. So for it, the path is very clear where it's going. And the conflict with Pakistan at some level it's sort of a nuisance, but it's not central essentially to the agenda of the state. India's development is not contingent on its conflict with Pakistan. In the short run, I think part of the escalation has to do that the Indians are very unhappy with the turn of events on Afghanistan. That all of a sudden, Pakistan and the United States have become virtual allies. They've moved from frenemies to actual friends on Afghanistan deal, and that the outcome in Afghanistan looks to be a victory for Pakistan, because the Taliban will be empowered at some level, and the Indians and their investment in the central government in Kabul is now in jeopardy. And then to add to that the American sanctions on Iran is threatening to basically shut off Indian investments into the port of Chabahar, which was built as a parallel competitor for Gwadar, and which would have given India independent access into Afghanistan and Central Asia, and that now looks to be in jeopardy. So the Indians all of a sudden think that the turn of play in Afghanistan has been such that they're complete losers, or could be complete losers, and so some of the escalation on the borders are designed on, I think, baiting Pakistan into some kind of a confrontation that then would complicate Afghanistan and complicate its relationship with the U.S. And I think as we go forward, if this deal gels, I do think that the Indians will continue to sort of try to see whether they can provoke the Pakistanis to lose focus on Afghanistan and get engaged on India. But in the longer term, now for Pakistan, for everything that Hina said, I think that there has to sort of, at some point, Pakistan has to decide how important is the conflict with India and Kashmir to the future of 200 million people in Pakistan. Because the Kashmir is not going to be sort of easily liberated without a victorious war against India, which is not only a very sort of improbable proposition. None of the wars against India so far have been knockout wars. There's no reason why this one would be. But also the amount of resources is going to take off Pakistani society and economy in order to have that kind of a military buildup is staggering. This country does not have the resources to build up to a level that actually can conquer Kashmir. And the Indians have actually moved a step further of actually taking Kashmir completely off the table, saying that this is no longer even a special territory within the Indian constitution. In other words, once and for all, this is done. This is now an integral part of India. And I would venture to say that probably a lot of the international community is going to support India. So, you already see Pakistan's close allies, Saudi Arabia and UAE, are essentially de facto or more than that supporting the Indian position. China is a friend of Pakistan, but on this issue is going to support India because they don't want anybody also to be talking about separation of Xinjiang and the Uyghur population, and especially an outside country essentially laying claim to territory. So one has to say, is it really prudent for Pakistan to pursue this at the cost of everything else in this country, or should the focus of Pakistan primarily be on development of its economy? Because end of the day, the only way Pakistan can back off India is by having a strong economy. If this economic gap between Pakistan and India increases, and India continues to become the third, the second, the first global economy in the next 10, 20 years, and Pakistan continues to have $6, $7, $10 billion budget deficits, have to go to IMF, have to go to Saudi Arabia to cover its budget, it's not going to be able to compete with India. And then, or to have any kind of an impact on Kashmir. So I think we're actually at a very critical crossover moment for the reason of the actions that India has taken in Kashmir. It's a game changer. It's a major shift in the crisis since 1948. And then on the other hand, the development in Afghanistan is also a game changer, which this war after 20 some years is finishing. And I would just add one other thing. Pakistan's commitments to maintaining and supporting its western border is only starting. America's getting out. Pakistan's headaches are only starting. And now it's on its own. Now it has to deal with the Taliban. It has to deal with Taliban both sides of the border. It has to deal with Pashtuns. It has to deal with a much bigger Afghanistan problem. It's going to require a lot of its resources to manage its western border, which I would say is much more critical to the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and stability of Pakistan than its eastern border is, because of the Pashtun composition of the population and the fact that you don't even have a border with Afghanistan.
In many places. Thank you.
Can I put in on that?
Please.
Thank you very much. Do you want to add something?
I do, because I think this is exceptionally important. And let me say, I would agree with everything Vali said vis-a-vis Pakistan-India relationship management, had he said this 7 years back, pre-Modi. So what you're talking makes sense for Pakistan, the path to take, had it been pre-Modi. And let me explain why, right? So just 4 quick points on this. First of all, when you talk about where is India, I may also disagree with that, okay? And I will put in front of you the 3 last cover pages that The Economist gave to India. Okay, it started with the first, which talked about India's growth bypassing China's growth, okay? The second came, whether Modi, is he going to take India forward or is he going to take India backwards because of his extremist tendencies? And the third was intolerant India. Okay, so this is where we stand. This is how the world was viewing India, taking over, or where is it going? It has become intolerant, okay? And I would like to make the point that that trajectory that India has chosen for itself is in some ways self-destruct free in a way that we have never experienced vis-a-vis India. So India is doing many of the mistakes that Pakistan made in the past. India is now very happily moving towards that, and frankly speaking, everybody can sit pretty in their seats, and if you want India to self-destruct, it seems to be doing it to itself. Secondly, on the Afghanistan thing, look, again, I think India is doing what Pakistan did in the 1970s and 80s. India is becoming a vassal state of the US within the region. India is being used as a China containment policy by the US, and therefore India's US ties will be far ahead of anybody who wants Pakistan to be very friendly with the Americans. Not happening anytime soon, because they are a major player on their China containment policy, and that is a big factor to US foreign policy right now. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, what is Pakistan going to do? Look, as a Pakistani, I have never been concerned about what our non-nuclear arsenal is today than I have ever been. I have never been concerned about it, but today I am concerned, because do not forget that February 2019, since 1971, for the first time, the Modi government, for electioneering, decided to cross over into our airspace and really be adventurous. So this is an adventurous, extremist India that we are facing, who is willing to pretty much put everything out, including the future of India and its people. And Vali, the growth rate that you're mentioning, we know that it is receding because of many of the internal factors, right? So India is neither growing at that level, nor does it have the secular democratic credentials that it used to have today, that it had like 20 years back. So I genuinely see that if India continues on this trajectory, Pakistan, the threat perception for Pakistan has suddenly become realistic and more, a person like myself who generally would believe that this is not a panga we want, right? We want to be able to concentrate on economic consolidation and all of that. On the western border, I think what Pakistan needs to do is what it hasn't done before. Look, a country's primary responsibility is its own security and its own interest. Okay, so sometimes we try and be too largest and say, everybody come in, the refugees, we will take care of everything, we will not secure our borders. We need to treat Afghanistan as a sovereign country, absolutely not have any interest in it as to who should be ruling and who should not be, but we must secure our borders through fencing and through smart technology and through security, paraphernalia. This is our primary responsibility. Secure that, and with India be ready for, I guess, I would say the worst we've seen, perhaps.
Sobering thought. Thank you very much. Can we take some questions, please? And please confine them to questions rather than statements. And for the record, if you could please state your name as well.
Look, there is a lot going for Pakistan. I mean, compared to a lot of other countries its size, it has a much more robust private sector that has thrived. It has a very large middle class. I would say, it's the size of the middle class in Pakistan is larger than many, Middle Eastern countries. The middle class in Pakistan is larger than the entire country of Iraq in terms of population size. The problem for Pakistan is that its political system and its government and its bureaucracy is standing in the way of the necessary changes that have to happen. Now, if you have about a $10 billion deficit, first things is that you need to see what is it that is costing the government so much money and offload it. Argentina did it, Brazil did it, Turkey did it, Indonesia did it. Pakistan is not the first country to face this. And then secondly is that how can you generate revenue which already exists in your country, which is you need to tax and you need to collect revenue for providing electricity, water, varieties of other services, which are right now, large amounts of it are taken for free by the population. And that would actually reduce the sort of the size of the deficit. And then you have to see how you grow the economy, which means make Pakistan attractive for businesses to come here. And that's things you need to do is that you need to have good laws, you need to have infrastructure, and starting with stable electricity, and you have to need security. I mean, there's no reason why a lot of countries wouldn't move their factories to Pakistan if it was a business-friendly environment.
Can we have, ek minute, baith jaye, please, I'll come to you, aap baith jaye. Can we have a question from the gentleman in the middle here? Microphones, beta.
My question is to Dr. Vali Nasr. And that is that, what do you see Afghanistan after America leaves? And Afghanistan's relationships with Pakistan?
So my first answer is that you should come to our session tomorrow with Ahmed Rashid, which deals with this issue completely. So we will be dealing with all of this tomorrow.
Easy answer.
Idhar aa jaye. Yaar, idhar. भाई सवाल पूछें ये आप स्टेटमेंट दे रहे हैं, सवाल पूछें कि अब आपने कह दिया ना, स्टेटमेंट अपनी पूरी होगी आपकी. जी, नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन प्लीज. जी.
Pakistan is unable to practicing its independent foreign policies due to independent foreign.
Can you go through the question from the beginning? आप सवाल आपका नहीं समझ आ रहा, प्लीज.
Unable to practice its independent foreign policy because of IMF and Saudi Arabian loans. So what are the alternatives Pakistan could have instead of these loans?
I mean, I'll let Hina answer that as well. I don't think the IMF is an obstacle to Pakistan's foreign policy. The question independence is only because of the relationship Pakistan has had with Saudi Arabia. That on particular issues that Saudi Arabia is interested in, which is issues that have to do with Iran or with Turkey or with an alternative to OIC, that Pakistan has followed Saudi advice on this, but on a variety of other issues, Pakistan has made its own decision.
Yeah, I would just say I think it's how you define your national interest. Okay. Because I was recently sharing the stage with another person who seems to be a big, previous a diplomat, and he was trying to argue that Pakistan serves its national interest when it decides not to go to Kuala Lumpur, despite the Prime Minister having committed to go to Kuala Lumpur, and despite the fact that the people who were coming to Kuala Lumpur happened to be the only 3 states which stood up for you on Kashmir, whereas the other states who you were listening to were giving guests of honor certificates on the OIC Foreign Ministers meeting to Sushma Swaraj right after the February airspace incident. So you speak by your actions, and Pakistan spoke clearly that Pakistan is a country which is indebted to any country which is willing to fund its fiscal deficit, and a country that stands up for Pakistan, are countries that Pakistan can choose to ignore. So you asked about alternative. The alternative has to start about redefining your national interest. And national interest, a country's foreign policy must only preserve its own national interest. But if you're willing to go to war because somebody else wants you to go to war here, there, and everywhere, which is what we've been doing, you can't possibly have an independent foreign policy.
The lady here.
Hi, my name is Saira. I just want to know what is our issue with being a divided Muslim world? Why do we need to be divided on that? Why can't we be just, is there a threat? Is there a united Christian world who is eyeing us? Why can't we be, together with other countries on the basis of ideology? Why do we only gang up with the Muslim countries? Number one. Number two is, what is the future of secularism in Pakistan?
So no, you're absolutely right. I mean, the sort of the notion of the fact that Ummah is anything more than a sort of a desired concept is actually a false assumption to build your foreign policy on. It doesn't really exist. As Hina said, every country has a national interest. And the national interests of Muslim countries are very different from one another. They have different alliances, they have different economic development plans. And even in the case of Pakistan, look at the Uyghur issue. Pakistan has been completely silent on this issue. Islamists in Pakistan have been silent on this issue. And whereas this is the single largest massacre of Muslims. I mean, if you think of a country taking an entire region with millions of Muslims and says in a determined fashion, we're going to convert them to something else by putting them in what looks like concentration camps, and Muslim countries have responded not because of this is an Islamic issue, but based on what is their national interest and what is their relationship with China. So it's always good, as Hina said, call a spade a spade. Let's stop pretending that Iran or Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Indonesia are likely to follow a notional Islamic foreign policy against their own national interests. In a bizarre way, actually, China is creating an ummah in a sense that everybody other than Turkey has so much relations with China that everybody is following the same policy vis-a-vis the Uyghurs. So it's not because of Islam, it's because of the tremendous love for China that is all over the Muslim world right now.
Look, can I just say that I think on that particular front, it is the notion of Muslim Ummah never probably existed the way we perceived it to exist and has completely shattered now. And I think we have enough evidence on the table. If we refuse to see it, that's our. And I would just say that I would not want Pakistan to unite with other countries other than the Muslim world on ideological basis even. I think Pakistan must unite with countries for its national interest. And I want to redefine national interest. National interest is not defined by your place in the world. National interest is defined in how you can deliver to the common citizen of Pakistan. And Pakistan may have done great job. I used to say this as foreign minister. Every time I would go to the UN, GA, General Assembly, or anywhere else, Christian Ahmadpur, Fareed Zakaria, everybody wanted to interview the Pakistani foreign minister. Nobody wanted to interview the Malaysian foreign minister. Are we to say Pakistan is more important? I would argue no, Pakistan is important for all the wrong reasons, right? And this is not saying Pakistan doesn't have immense potential even on the foreign policy framework, but this is to say that we need to at least not repeat the mistakes that we have repeated in the past. In order to do that, you have to really have a clear-headed assessment of what we've gained, what we've lost from projecting ourselves in the way that we did in the past, and perhaps reorient now towards the future.
You answer.
Yes, I think, look, I don't want to talk about it in terms of theology versus secularism. I think secularism also, the defining moment of a nation or the defining feature of a nation should be to deliver. So this defending the ideology of Pakistan 70 years back, I believe is a bad notion to try and coalesce people's support with, right? Because it's like, you know, people actually argue about that oh, but many countries are able to deliver to the people, but how many countries are there who are able to defend ideologies? Matlab, is that your goal? I think it's a terrible goal to have, because you have to defend the people, not the ideology.
Yes. My question is specifically addressed to Hina. You had been part of the government. To what extent military impact Pakistan's foreign policy? How do you see the role of Pakistani parliament in uniting the collective voices of Muslim Ummah? Thank you.
Okay, on the second one, I don't believe our goal and objective of the parliament or the government or the state or the people of Pakistan should be uniting the Ummah, which does not even exist. Okay, let's be clear on that. So let's get clarity on that. And on the first one, look, you can imagine this was the favorite question that would come up at every forum I went as foreign minister. And this continues to be the favorite question that still erupts, okay? I'll be honest with you. Look, we in our times, after 1965, for the first time, normalized trade relations with India and had given approval for MFN status. Did we do that after asking the military? Did the military? No, because they weren't a player on that. They're not economic managers of this country, right? Now, when it came to Afghanistan, yes, we spent long, hard hours discussing, negotiating, giving up, taking their position, because they are players in that, and they should be, and everywhere in the world, including the country that Vali Nasr represents. By the way, you know, I said this in the Hard Talk interview, and Stephen wasn't very happy, but we are most similar to the Americans in the way our dynamics of civil-military work. The Americans have a very strong Pentagon, which sometimes, but I generally felt that if the players, the political players know what they want, are able to hold their weight, the military doesn't. But if you give them space and tell them to come all around and to, you know, be the arbitrators, you know, right now we're asking intelligence agencies to manage pricing, inflation.
Sugar.
Okay? So please, let's forget about the old, nice Pakistan in which foreign policy was the only thing we were concerned about. Right now we're concerned about their role in the management of inflation in Pakistan. So if you're going to give them space, of course, any actor would like to take that space. But if you know what your space is, I take full responsibility for the 3 years I spent in the Foreign Office. Every decision, whether it was the negotiation with the Taliban, trying to do the reconciliation, whether it was engagement with India, you know, we normalized visa regime, we normalized trade relations, and these were big factors. We tried to do barter trade with Iran. We went ahead with IPI despite US, you know, very strong. So I genuinely believe if the political entity itself wants to give that space away, it's theirs to give. But the Constitution clearly articulates whose responsibility it is. If you have it in you to take that responsibility seriously, they can only be, they're helpful. I don't think that's the other way around.
The lady in the center.
Okay, my question is from Vali Nasr Sahab. You talked about Pashtun point. I'm a Pashtun. I went to Afghanistan. Mainly Pashtuns are based in Afghanistan or Pakistan or India, UP. What I saw in Afghanistan is that Farsi Khwan and Hazaras are more stronger than Pashtuns. The Pashtun refugees going back from Pakistan to Jalalabad were not happy because of the life conditions there. And the Pashtuns in UP, India are in front of everyone nowadays. So how can you explain that Pashtuns are going to be an issue for Pakistan now? Because in all these three countries, in Pakistan they are a bit better condition than Afghanistan and in India. Thank you so much.
Well,
it's not a question of condition, but it's a question of reality. In Afghanistan, the Pashtuns are about 40% of the population, and they have historically ruled government in Kabul, whether in varieties of forms. And in Pakistan, you tell me, but the estimation is somewhere around 15% of the population are Pashtuns. Now, 15% of 200 million is a lot larger number than 40% of 20 million. So it means that there are more Pashtuns in Pakistan. They live on a contiguous border, literally from Kabul all the way to the borders of KP and Punjab. There is no actual border between them. Anybody who has been in Kabul has generally had an attitude that Afghanistan has some kind of oversight or some kind of influence over Pakistan's Pashtuns. So, Afghanistan, once the United States leaves, there's still an issue about Pashtun nationalism and a Pashtun state north of the border, and Pashtun nationalism and Pashtun state south of the border. Now, the worse the conditions of the Pashtuns, the more there is always going to be political trouble. I mean, end of the day, regardless of whether the Pashtuns are doing well or not doing well, the question becomes, how does Pakistan-Afghanistan relations take shape? And if you look historically, these relations have never been good. I mean, the only country that objected to Pakistan being admitted to the United Nations was Afghanistan. Pakistan has always felt that Kabul has eyes on its Pashtun territories, and literally the only period that Pakistan, ironically, was not dealing with this was during the Taliban period. And even when President Karzai came to power, he sort of assumed the role like he's president of Afghanistan, but king of all Pashtuns. I mean, sort of that his writ almost extends into Pakistani Pashtuns. So, there are live issues there. There's a live ethnic issue, and you cannot deny it. And at the end of the day, Pakistan has to manage that. And the south of the border, there are, whether you look at FATA issue, at KP issue, there are unresolved institutional issues in Pakistan that have to also be settled. And the two countries actually have to agree to a border. Would the government in Kabul actually agree to the Durand line becoming a border? I don't know. I would say right now, no. No government in Kabul is going to accept the border, which tells you that they don't see Pashtuns South and Pashtuns North as being divided. They don't view the Pashtuns as South as Pakistani citizens and Pashtuns North of the borders as Afghan citizens. They see them as one people.
I think we have time for one last question. The gentleman.
Sir, why does Pakistan is always punching above its weight when it comes to its foreign policy? Why not we just become a normal state, just like other normal states are? Why not we value geoeconomics? Because geopolitics has not served our country well. Because the bubble of Islamic Ummah has been busted. So now we should have to focus on our geoeconomics. The world is changing. Thank you.
So I would just, and I think at the more local level you should answer. I think that the larger issue, this was what I worked on. The discourse that was started by Muslim Brotherhood in the Arab world, by Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran, and by Maududi in South Asia, in Pakistan, was based on Islamization of politics, which also included foreign policy. Now, some countries have sort of freed themselves of this at some level. But let's say Iran and Pakistan have not fully freed themselves of that. So long as, Islam is such a big part of the political discourse in Pakistan, it's not as easy to say that we're just going to make it irrelevant. We're still dealing, I guess you're still dealing in Pakistan with the discussion about Islam and politics, Islamic State, that really started with the Objectives Resolution in 1949. And then in the 1970s was enshrined in the state of Pakistan under General Zia, and it's still there. And no government in Pakistan has been actually able to completely change direction.
Okay, can I just add to that? I think the question that we need to ask ourselves also is this a natural inclination that the majority of Pakistanis have, or is this an inclination that has been forced through narrative shaping over years and decades? upon Pakistanis, right? Because if it's a natural inclination, then the majoritarianism and democratic credentials would require that you follow whatever but if this is part of the state narrative which is imbibed into a newborn Pakistani and taken all the way up, then it is a question that we can ask. But I also want to sort of, on the Pashtun question, I think that's an exceptionally important question when it comes to Afghanistan-Pakistan relations. And I'm a big believer in Pakistan fully accepting Afghan sovereignty to the extent that not wanting a friendly, unfriendly, this, that, the other. What the Afghans choose is for Pakistan to respect, right? But I'm also even a firmer believer that both the countries have to act like sovereigns also. So it's a two-way street. So Afghans cannot go like, oh, all the terrorism is coming from Pakistan, but we don't want you to fence the border. Despite the fact that we want to continue to claim that all the terrorism is coming from Pakistan. And when it comes to easement rights and all of those sorts of interesting, nice, fancy, not fancy, but intricate issues, I think, look, in many European countries, you had borders which weren't very clear, right? Pre the advent of passports and visas and everything. That was long time back. We can't continue to act like this is the fifth province, Khuda na khasta, or something like that. Like, you have to respect each other's sovereignty, but then the other country also has to act as sovereign. And for Pakistan, I think the whole question of the Pashtun descent as we see it, I don't see it as Pashtun descent, I see it Pashtun diversity. Now, we all know that the region in which Pakistan had to have military operations was inhabited largely by the Pashtuns. So it's almost natural that the Pashtuns will have a voice right now or concerns about what happened to them from the American drones and many other things. I genuinely believe the state should look at this and deal with it in a much more largest fashion, right? Rather than looking at it in terms of those people who are speaking against the state, I look at it as people of the state who are speaking to the state about some issues that need to be resolved, which are all within the paradigm and within the limits of the constitution. So the state's reaction to it, I think, needs to be much, much, much better. And again, for that also, all we need to do is learn our lessons from history and react in a more sort of, way which can assist us in, making, because you cannot force a country, a people, of any people, whether it's the Baloch, or the Pashtuns, or the Punjabis, or the Sindhis, to take a buy-in. You can't enforce a buy-in on them. The state has to act in a way where their identity becomes a Pakistani before a Pashtun, or coexist. I'm cool with an Islamic, Punjabi, I would say Saraiki, and a Pakistani identity all at the same time. I'm proud of each one of them. Why should I have to choose? Yeah.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of this session. Dr. Vali Nasr, Hina Rabbani Khar, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Farhan.